I'm not even gonna try to say Carol's last name.
I do ask that everybody at least try.
Hirschkakoi.
Well, the H is silent. I'll help you out. It's Ruskosi.
Ruskowski.
Ah, Rakowski. Okay. That's easier than I thought it was going to be. Rakowski.
Yeah, it's harder to look at it, I get it.
Yeah. All right. Well, welcome everybody. We'll wait a few more minutes for a few more people to join. And then we'll go from there. I know Jennifer said that she needed the link sent to another email. So we'll just kind of wait. How's it going, Armando?
It's going well.
Guys, it's done raining in southern Florida.
I know.
A little bit on and off, but not as bad as last week. Last week was crazy. A lot of rain. Luckily, no flooding in my area, but flooding definitely everywhere around me.
That sucks. Well, good for you,
Yeah.
but sucks for everybody else.
Right.
Jackson, please stop.
Whoever it was needs to stop. I think they were actually helping Armando out in southern Florida, telling the rain to stop. That's what was happening.
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
That's what it's. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I know we're probably still missing a few people, but we'll go ahead and get started. Just for also, since there's some people here who are new to the group, I know I mentioned before we'd have continuing education, whether it was mental health continuing education, yoga continuing education, or whatever it is. We'd have new folks kind of popping in and out. So I feel like we can go around and do a quick introduction, and probably better than the one introduction that I did whenever Shaquan came to the group. But this time, maybe what we can do is we can go around, we can kind of introduce ourselves. And if you already work for an agency as a coach, maybe say that. Or maybe just say the agency that you work for in general, and then maybe why you want to be a health and wellness coach. And if you're already a health and wellness coach, what made you want to be a health and wellness coach? So I'm Charlie. I currently work at the Wellness Effect and Peak Valor Health and Fitness. We have a few different sister companies. And what really got me into the coaching field, I started as a licensed clinical social worker in the field and really started working in that and realized that I really didn't want to help people process things. I wanted to help people move forward. And in my opinion, that's what the health coaching field does. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Todd.
I'm Todd Rayleigh. I'm a program manager for the VA in central Wisconsin. In addition to that, I'm a board certified health and wellness coach. I don't know what my title is, adjunct faculty, or I just hang out here for a wellness effect.
Just hang out.
And my impetus to become a health and wellness coach is, when I was retired from the service, I wanted to continue to serve, and I wanted to serve my fellow veterans. And I really find it empowering and fulfilling for myself to be able to assist others in reaching their fullest potential.
All right. Thanks, Todd. Now let's go ahead, and I'm just going to go down the list for time's sake, if everybody's okay with that. And on mine, it is Armando.
Yeah. I don't work for an agency. I work kind of for myself. I have my own company and personal training. And I got into health and wellness. Well, one, it was just recommended to me by actually my coach that's been helping me. But also just to have a better understanding, I think it has a very good direct correlation between personal training, because you are helping and coaching and kind of trying to help them process through the things. And so I think it's just going to enhance that a little bit further and possibly give me more avenues for different job opportunities. So
Absolutely. So thanks, Armando. So got into it because of another coach, right? So that's another good way to get into the field, I feel like, right?
yes, sir.
Let's see. I got on my list Brock.
Yeah, what's going on, guys? I'm Brock. I'm from Arizona. I've been in coaching for about 14 years when I got out of my active opiate use. I work for a company called What Good Looks Like. I work in the fraternity system helping young men, and I like this. This has been a cool program. I never thought I would didn't feel like the national certification was an important thing, but the more I look into it, I'm pretty excited to be around you guys. So thank you.
Well, we're excited for you to be here and able to bring your voice in here with all that experience and everything, Brock. So we definitely appreciate you. All right, next on up is Mark.
Hey, I'm Mark. I'm in Colorado. I currently work for Rocky Mountain Human Services as a training specialist. I heard about this health and wellness coaching from Charlie's wife. She's one of my bosses, and seems like it would be a cool opportunity. I was kind of thinking of like maybe a population I could work with, and kind of what came to mind was like foster parents. My wife and I were foster parents for about 7 years, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into that, and it can affect your health and wellness if you're not taking care of yourself. So to be able maybe to coach others that are taking on that role would be pretty cool. So
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. You know, that brings up, you know, another good point is one thing that we definitely want to do is build a foster care model that has health and wellness coaching in it, right? That actually
right on. All right.
level people. I don't know if I've ever mentioned that to you or not, but that is our goal. We also
Okay.
have been working on starting a national holistic or a national consortium for holistic foster parents. And then
That's
we kind of train them to be holistic providers and different things like that. So
sweet.
yeah,
Perfect.
that'll be awesome. All right. Next I see Shaquan.
I am Shaquan. I don't work for anywhere either. I own a company called Mentally Ill. I do custom printing, but I, of course, have the big emphasis on mental health and then illnesses. Um, I was talking to Carrie about some different programming that I was putting together for the kids and just what really like hits close to home for me. And so she told me everything you guys were doing, and I think it's phenomenal. I've never wanted to be on the like therapist side, just because I know a lot of people that I've encountered in my upbringing, like those aren't people that you necessarily can go and talk to. But I wanted to be able to have some sort of training so I'm not just, out there putting people into unsafe situations without even knowing it. So that's what brought me here.
Absolutely. And we're grateful to have you as well. And definitely hopefully there's great partnerships and other things that spring out of this in the future. So thanks, Shaquan, for being here. All right, next on I see Carol.
Hello, everybody. I'm Carol. I'm in Denver, Colorado, originally from the Chicago area. So I am nationally board certified. I'm not practicing at the moment. My full-time work is a director of learning design. So I came at this, I'm a former professor, always been in education, and I really love the one-on-one work that I do with students. And as a professor, part of a leadership academy, I did a project about resilience and working through transitional times in life. And so that's what drew me to this particular topic. And that is a topic, and the clientele that I like to work with is folks going through transitional times of their lives. This came for me at a time I got my certification just on the backside of COVID. I'm a widow, two-time cancer survivor, lost my job as a professor during COVID. So I have a lot of firsthand experience about transitional times. So I believe in giving back, and that's what intrigued me about becoming a coach.
Thank you for that. And we are so grateful to have you here. I forgot to mention, I'm also in Colorado Springs. So the Wellness Effect is actually a Colorado business. And then inside of that, we have Peak Valor Health and Fitness, to where we use a gym basically, to where we provide health and wellness coaching, mental health counseling, Ozempic prescriptions, just different things like that. So if you want to learn more about, some of those services, just let us know, especially
Will
since.
do.
So
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, thank you for being here. All right, Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Predmore. I'm in Memphis. I worked with Charlie and Carrie at what used to be Camelot, now is Clarvita. We do behavioral health and foster care. So I've been on the other side of foster care for many, many years. And just thought this would be a great way to help other people, and maybe just another revenue stream as well. So excited to be here. Thanks.
That's awesome. So yeah, so thank you for being here. Let's see, am I missing it? Oh, Kirby. Kirby's next.
Hi, I am Kirby. I am working currently as a nanny, but I have a degree in social work, and I worked in as a school social worker for a few years, and I want to go back to school for psychology at some point. I thought this would be a really good interim, essentially, and a way to kind of get back into the hang of working with clients in that way, as opposed to from the nanny side, where it's a lot more personal. So very excited to be here.
Okay, thanks, Kirby, and thank you for being here. I'll go ahead and introduce Christina, since she had to drop and she's changing just for time's sake. And she is a health coach and yoga therapist, and feel that the two integrate well with one another. And she loves supporting people with their goals. I also failed to mention I'm also a yoga therapist as well, as an LCSW too. So, I think being a yoga therapist and a health coach, in my opinion, go hand in hand as well. All right, so tonight's topic. So let's go ahead and jump in. Thank you all for doing those introductions. I think that's kind of important for us to be able to kind of know one another as we're doing this, because tonight we're really going to be talking about ourselves a lot, more than we're going to be talking about with coaches. We're going to be talking about mindful resilience for compassion fatigue, and then we're going to jump into some of the stages of change afterwards, just because we need to know ourselves whenever we're going through those changes. But more importantly, if we're working in private practice, if we're working anywhere, right, then we need to really focus on our self-care. So continuing education, if you're a mental health therapist, we got continuing education for that. This is also a National Board Health and Wellness continuing education program, and the American Holistic Nursing Credentialing Corporation, and of course, yoga, if anybody needs yoga continuing educations as well. We'll have a survey that'll be sent to you after the course from Haley, and then Haley will be able to do that for you. So kind of jumping in, I already kind of went over this. We're really going to be talking and having an overview of mindful resilience, right? Because we really want to focus on us this time. And resilience, grit, burnout, and then self-care goals, and then the stages of change. We already did introductions, so I'll skip that. So whenever you all think of mindful resilience for compassion fatigue, what really comes to mind? Or, well, whenever you hear those words, mindful resilience for compassion fatigue, what comes to mind for you all?
For compassion fatigue, what comes up for me is when you're kind of in our personal lives, right? We're serving our community, at least for me, and with kids and all of this stuff, and showing up emotionally and everything. And then I would go to my job and I had clients and I had to show up for them emotionally. And when that burnout hits, I could not show up for them emotionally. And I realized that compassion fatigue was happening. So that was my experience with it. And that's when I had to check in with my supervisor and talk through it and work on getting back up, because it's a real thing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because it is a real thing, right? We experience it every day. We'll experience it all the time, right? And if we are dealing with people, uses a good metaphor in that second bullet point that says, working with, are doing this work without being affected is like trying to walk through water without getting wet, right? If you work with people are emotional. There's always going to be that counter transference, right? And what I mean by that is it could bring up issues for you with people. It could bring up issues that they may have, right? And one issue that just comes to mind from a recent conversation is even something like alcoholism, right? Being able to if you are an alcoholic and then you're working with alcoholics, right? That transference can happen even if you've been sober for a long period of time. And I think that's a good way to kind of look at transferences is that urge to drink may increase if you're working with people, and especially if you're going to talk to people about recent sobriety and things like that, it can be hard. And then if that's going to be your special population that you work with, I know we talk a lot about this sometimes, is finding your population can be a double-edged sword, right? Because most people want to get into the helping profession because they want to help because of some adverse experience that they experienced, right? And then you want to be like, well, now I want to go help people do that, right? I want to help people overcome that. And then whenever you do that, then that transference happens. So it's very important for us, especially if we're on that island in private practice, or even if we're in an organization. I worked in higher ed and places like that as well. And even in higher ed, you would think that they would have a better well-being program for professors just because they know the research is there, but it's not, right? So, even whenever we're in the field and we're not particularly in the field of health coaching, we're still working with people and we're still people at the end of the day. We have expectations and sometimes employers don't meet it and then we end up getting burnt out. But the biggest thing that we can do is really start to identify these things, right? So the biggest thing is that we need to recognize signs and symptoms. We need to put tools in place to prevent it or minimize it, right? We're not going to be able to prevent burnout. We're not going to be able to prevent compassion fatigue. We're not going to be able to prevent vicarious trauma. It's just something that we're not going to be able to do. But what we are going to be able to do is be able to put tools in place to hopefully minimize it, to be able to control our symptoms whenever they come up. That's right, the 85% rule. And then treating it through deliberate practice, which we're going to talk a little bit about later. But the first thing that we talk about is bringing it into awareness. So we need common definitions. So whenever we think of resilience, what is your definition, or what do you think of whenever you think of resilience?
Being able to roll with the punches. So I see it.
Yeah, being able to roll with the punches. That's right. That's definitely a good way to look at it.
I often use the analogy of peaks and valleys. I love to hike, but I think it's the ability to rest in that valley, but then pull yourself out of that valley and reach toward the next peak.
Yeah, that's another great metaphor of being able to use that. So really being able to rest in that valley, right? So then you'll be able to rest and then be able to recharge, right? Hopefully whenever you're in that valley, and then pick yourself up the hill, right? Pick that boulder up the hill. All right, let's see, anybody? Oh, here we go. Getting up one more time than you were knocked down. That's right. You're always going to be knocked down. That's life. It's really how you are going to overcome it whenever you do get knocked down. All right, so I will say I love this definition. For anybody here who's ever been trained in heart math or know what heart math is, I know some folks have probably heard me say this before, but heart math is like a mindfulness technique mixed with biofeedback. They use heart rate variability to bring and kind of create this coherence in people. And their definition of resilience, in my opinion, is one of the best definitions. And it almost goes to Carol's definition, except what I like about this one more is this talks about how you recharge that battery, right? It's not just a capacity to prepare for, recover from, and adapt in the face of stress, challenges, and adversity, right? So it's not just about the ability to punch back, but it's also the ability to prepare for it, right? It's also the ability to recover from. So whenever you are in that valley, going off that same metaphor, right, is if you're in that valley, how are you recharging yourself? Because if you just think your resiliency is going to recharge on its own, it's not, right? It's going to be inflamed, and you're going to end up not being able to activate your resiliency because you haven't recharged your battery. So in the big picture, you can learn to build your resilience and capacity and sustain that energy over time. And then whenever we look at this, we are energy systems, right? So anything that goes out must come back in, right? And we have to think of that in resiliency as well. If we only think that resiliency is a one-way factor, then we're always going to be depleted of our resiliency, and then we're not going to respond the way that we want, especially in the times of adverse resiliency or adverse actions. So another thing that HeartMath did was they came up with these domains of resilience. So whenever we look at coherence, this is really, as you can see, all the pieces kind of come together right here at coherence. So they use the word coherence as being able to be able to self-regulate. Maybe that's another good way to look at coherence. You've now been able to calm down, and you've been able to activate some skills. But they did these domains. So you look at physical, so physicality, right? Endurance and strength. So Armando, this is where Armando's helping probably a lot of his people right out the gate, right, for personal training. I know I do some personal training too, and everybody that I'm focused on personal training, a lot of times it's always here, right? But I'll also say a lot of times it's here too, is the mental flexibility. They're not really able to kind of get over things. But whenever you look at mental flexibility, right, it's the attention span, ability to focus, right? A lot of times, and going off the personal training thing and the analogy, is a lot of times people even go into a gym and they get so overwhelmed that they don't work out, right? It has nothing to do with anything else. There's just so many freaking options and they don't know what to do. So then they're kind of stuck in that paralysis mode. So incorporate multiple points of view. So if you're having a hard time being able to incorporate multiple points of view and be able to do that, which I think we see a lot in the world today, in politics to everything, right? The inability to find that middle path. That's usually mental flexibility, right? And mental resiliency. But then emotional flexibility, right? Positive outlook on life, self-regulation, just being able to control your emotions in the moment. And then spirituality was the other domain, and being able, the commitment to values. I know we talk a lot in coaching about the conflict values, right? And being able to identify those for our clients and being able to show that there's a conflict in this value. Well, that's sometimes in the spiritual domain of resiliency. Tolerance of others' values and beliefs, right? So that kind of almost goes back to also being able to be open-minded whenever other people have different views and values and things like that. So now that you've seen this, which area do you think is most depleting? So whenever you activate one of these domains, whether it's emotional, physical, mental, or spiritual, which one do you think depletes your energy the most and the fastest and for the longest?
I believe it'd be emotional. Like,
Emotional?
yeah, that's the way I view it, but that's just me.
Just you?
I agree. I think it's emotional because it affects everything. Emotions affect your health. So I think emotions affect your mental health and your physical health. So I agree.
And I would say mental.
You'd say mental, bro?
I
Yeah.
would say mental as well.
Yeah, Shaquan. Well, I'll say I'm kind of frustrated at everybody else because they definitely got it right. It's emotional. If you can think about it from an emotional standpoint, if you get into a fight with somebody, like a significant other or something, your heart rate and everything stays activated longer, right? You stick with that a whole lot more if you get into an emotional fight versus even a physical fight, right? Or even a spiritual fight. It tends to be, that piece. And here goes. So this study right here, well, it really wasn't a study. It was something that happened. So at the HeartMath Institute, what they did was they had many studies over the years, but what they would do is they would hook them up to their technology that would control or measure their heart rate variability. And they left the HeartMath Institute, and then right around here, the wife said something that got underneath the husband's skin. And I always make a joke and said they probably left, right? So here goes 10 minutes, and then they started talking about what they were going to eat, right? Because nobody ever makes a decision whenever it comes to that, right? So then everybody gets frustrated. So then now all of a sudden they're arguing about where they're going to go eat. But really in the big picture, what you see here is this happens, right? You see a spike in the heart rate variability. And then what you notice is this stays far longer at a higher elevated rate than anything you could do. So if you're in the gym with Armando and he's, working you out really hard and he's doing all these different things and you're sitting there sweating, your heart rate wouldn't stay elevated as long as it is in this emotional fight, right? You would probably stay elevated for anywhere between 15 minutes to maybe 20 minutes, but probably more than likely, probably 15 minutes, right? So here, whenever you get into an emotional fight, your heart rate stays, elevated a whole lot longer, close to more like 30 minutes to 45 minutes. And why is that important? Is if you really think about stress on the body, right? If you have emotional stress that you're not really able to head off with some type of built practice and resiliency, then you're going to have a harder time longer in life, right? Stress will reduce your longevity in life at the end of the day, whether we like that or not, whether we agree with it or not. The research shows it is if you don't do things to manage your stress, then you're going to end up having, a shorter lifespan. It's going to have heart disease, it's going to increase so many different things. So that's why it's so important for us to know that we need a plan for resiliency. We need a plan to be able to do that, and we need to be able to have that balance. So constant energy expenditures without the balance of adequate rest and recovery lead to burnout, errors, health challenges, and diminished performance. So no matter where you're at, if you are not focused on your energy balance and you're not really focused on giving back into that, then really you are going to be you're going to be more susceptible to burnout, more susceptible to creating those errors. But I'll say more importantly, you're more susceptible to problems at home, right? So I know we're talking a lot about work, but whenever we really start to talk about burnout and we're not talking about building a resiliency plan to be more proactive, you're going to start seeing problems at home, and it's not just going to be at work, right? It's not just going to be those issues of, man, I really hate going to see this one client, right? Man, he's going to talk my ear off and I'm just not ready for it. I just can't deal with it today. It'll be so much more than that, right? It'll be on your way home, then you'll be thinking, man, I just don't even want to go home, right? Or some other negative thought about home. And then it's just going to continue. So we have to really focus on this. And I say this because this study was done in the Navy. I don't think we have any Navy veterans on. I was in the Marine Corps, so probably the closest, I guess, but we don't ever claim the Navy.
Coast Guard, baby.
Huh?
I said Coast Guard, baby. Puddle pirate.
There you go. You're a puddle pirate. I don't think I've heard that in a long time. Okay, but so this was done in the Navy, and what they were really looking at was people's performance levels over time. And this is really important because whenever we think about performance, everybody's performance on anything that they do has an arc, right? And here goes that arc roughly, is right through here. So you kind of start, and whenever you start, you have, you kind of embrace this challenge and improve in performance. You're down here, you don't really know anything. Maybe it's education you're starting to gain, whatever it is, right? You're gaining your momentum because you're excited. And then you have this period of maximum efficiency, right? During that time, you're doing more research, you're really excited, you're really hoping that this is going to turn into something. And then you have this hyper reactivity stage, right? Because now you have to pivot, or something's going on. Something's challenging you now, because that's what happens every single time that you get into any type of change, is something is now challenging you. And now you're in this hyper-reactive, so you're just responding to things as opposed to actually coming up with a plan, which increases burnout. So then you have this emotional exhaustion stage, right? So now you're completely done, right? You're over it. It's a wrap at this point, right? And now you're pretty much over this task and you don't want to be a part of it. And now you get the negative attitude, right? And now you're like, oh, now I got to go do this crap again. So whenever you think about that, what the Navy really looked at was, if that's the performance level, then how can we increase, especially people who are on ships, people who are in combat zones, how can we increase their performance level for a longer period of time? Because we have, as the military, you have to be able to do that, right? You have to be able to do that. So what they implemented was heart math. So simple, they didn't do the technology, they just implemented heart-focused breathing. And then the performance level went from, as you can see, that to being able to do that. So in my opinion, very clinical significance, and went off the chart as opposed to that. So the mental exhaustion was not as bad whenever you implemented something ahead of time, right? So you're going to be able to perform those tasks for longer periods of time because you have a plan and you're hitting this hyper reactivity stage at a higher level of performance and a higher level of response, right? And once you hit this hyper-reactive phase and you're not just responding to things, now you're actually being able to push that change beyond where you're going. Does anybody have any questions about stress, resilience, or anything like that right now? Or anything that I've covered so far this morning, or this afternoon, this evening? Man, I don't even know what time it is. No? Okay. All right. Oh, let's see. Okay. All right. Well, how many people here has heard of grit? What would be your definition of grit then? How many people, how would you define
Nasty Southern dish.
a nasty Southern dish? Man, don't get me on grits. I love grits. I love some good grits now. For the folks in Colorado, I haven't lived in Colorado my whole life. I've only been here about 2 years. I lived in the South the rest of my life. So grits, I love some good grits.
Off topic, but sugar or salt?
Sugar, but really I don't put sugar in them at all either. I don't put sugar or salt in them. I can just eat my grits with butter. All right. So sorry. So who else has some definitions of grit? Since Todd got us off topic.
Like courage.
Courage, right? Yeah, the courage to kind of keep going, right? Is what I would think of.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great definition. So next we're going to hear, let me make sure I'm sharing my sound real fast. And then, so this is, I don't think it tells who she is, but her name, actually I think it does, but she's a clinical psychologist. Her name is Angela Duckworth, and she's done a lot of research on grit and then came up with different types of grit scales and things like that. So hopefully everybody can hear this.
When I was 27 years old, I left a very demanding job in management consulting for a job that was even more demanding, teaching. I went to teach 7th graders math in the New York City public schools. And like any teacher, I made quizzes and tests, I gave out homework assignments. When the work came back, I calculated grades. What struck me was that IQ was not the only difference between my best and my worst students. Some of my strongest performers did not have stratospheric IQ scores. Some of my smartest kids weren't doing so well. And that got me thinking. The kinds of things you need to learn in 7th grade math, sure, they're hard. Ratios, decimals, the area of a parallelogram. But these concepts are not impossible. And I was firmly convinced that every one of my students could learn the material if they worked hard and long enough. After several more years of teaching, I came to the conclusion that what we need in education is a much better understanding of students and learning from a motivational perspective, from a psychological perspective. In education, the one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end of the school year. And of those, who will be the most effective at improving learning outcomes for their students? We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs and who's going to earn the most money. In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. A few years ago, I started studying grit in the Chicago public schools. I asked thousands of high school juniors to take grit questionnaires, and then waited around more than a year to see who would graduate. Turns out that grittier kids were significantly more likely to graduate, even when I matched them on every characteristic I could measure, things like family income, standardized achievement test scores, even how safe kids felt when they were at school. So it's not just at West Point or the National Spelling Bee that grit matters, it's also in school, especially for kids at risk for dropping out. To me, the most shocking thing about grit is how little we know, how little science knows about building it. Every day, parents and teachers ask me, how do I build grit in kids? What do I do to teach kids a solid work ethic? How do I keep them motivated for the long run? The honest answer is, I don't know. What I do know is that talent doesn't make you gritty. Our data show very clearly that there are many talented individuals who simply do not follow through on their commitments. In fact, in our data, grit is usually unrelated or even inversely related to measures of talent. So far, the best idea I've heard about building grit in kids is something called growth mindset. This is an idea developed at Stanford University by Carol Dweck, and it is the belief that the ability to learn is not fixed, that it can change with your effort. Dr. Dweck has shown that when kids read and learn about the brain and how it changes and grows in response to challenge, they're much more likely to persevere when they fail because they don't believe that failure is a permanent condition. So growth mindset is a great idea for building grit, but we need more. And that's where I'm going to end my remarks, because that's where we are. That's the work that stands before us. We need to take our best ideas, our strongest intuitions, and we need to test them. We need to measure whether we've been successful, and we have to be willing to fail, to be wrong, to start over again with lessons learned. In other words, we need to be gritty about getting our kids grittier. Thank you.
All right, what are you all taking away from that video?
I liked how she said that life is a marathon and not a sprint. I think we want that like instant gratification or like to see the progress soon after we start something, but just being mindful of like, I don't know, like she said, you're in it for the long haul, not just a short time.
That's right. I like that too. It's not a sprint, right? It's a marathon. And whenever we think about that, you know, she definitely points to that, in my opinion, multiple times, as it's not a marathon. Failure is not a permanent condition, right? I love that. You know, I know some folks here have worked with me. Failure is something that I embrace, right? I want to fail, and I want to fail fast. So that way I can pivot and move forward. I'd rather implement something than plan it to death, right? And I think that's another big piece. So many people, our culture really finds failure as such a negative connotation, but it's not, right? Failure is a part of life, and failure is something that we are all going to have to embrace. All right, anything else? Stick to it, Ness. All right, well, I'm going to drop in the grit scale. So if you all could take like the next 5 minutes, it's only 7 or 8 questions, but if y'all could take the next 5 minutes or so to fill that out, and then we'll have a discussion about it. Is everybody good? Well, actually, I should have said, is anybody not good? Good. Okay. All right. So we're going to do a breakout, have everybody break out. There'll be about 2 to 3 people in everybody's group, but discuss your grit score. Identify ways to build resiliency and grit. Discuss challenges in building grit, and then be prepared to discuss whenever you come back. Does anybody have any questions about that? So ultimately, it is discuss your grit score, develop a plan to increase your grit score through building resiliency, right? And then discuss challenges in building grit, and then, of course, be prepared to discuss. All right. No questions. I'll go ahead and put you all in a breakout. Todd, you don't have to join your breakout room. I just couldn't get you not to be identified in one.
Hey, Charlie, while we're here, can I ask you a quick question?
You're
I
on mute,
think
Charlie.
you're on mute, but hey, brother, can I get that portal so I can get all the books and PowerPoint stuff? Maybe I got it, but I never saw it.
Yeah, I'll send it out to you.
Thanks, man.
Because I
Thanks.
think I sent it to Chasing the Base. That's still the good one, right? Chasing the Base.
Yeah. Thanks, brother.
I'll get it. All right. Well, how was that for everybody?
Pretty cool. A little self-reflection is nice.
Little self-reflection is nice. Well, let me ask, what was y'all's grit scores?
Well, I'll start, I guess. I don't know. Mine was a 3.2.
3.2. And what did
Yeah.
that 3.2 mean to you?
At first I was like, oh, it's not as bad as I thought, and it is a little bit lower than what I would like it to be. But then when I kind of reflect back into my life and some of those questions, it was something that I think I have the resilience and the grit, but it has to be something that interests me. And I think the issue I've been having is that I've been stretched really thin doing a lot of stuff. And some of that stuff I do like to do, but it's not something I love to do. So just streamlining, like how Brock said, streamlining the stuff that I really have interest in, so that way that grit and that resilience shows towards the stuff that I actually love doing and not the other shit that I've been doing and don't really care for as much.
That's right, getting bogged down with all the other crap you gotta do or feel like you have to do versus the things you love to do.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. That's great. Let's see, anybody else?
Mine's kind of similar. I got a 3.8, which I was kind of, I don't know, it's lower than I wanted it to be as well. But looking at the questions too, it's that same thing of like, I noticed I can lose focus very easily. And so it has to be something that like means something to me. and like really touched me. Otherwise,
Yeah.
and then of course, it's easy to just quit doing it. I've always been a person that I say that like, if I can't be all in, and I understand that doesn't happen with everything in life, but if I can't be all in, I don't necessarily want to do it, because then you're not getting the piece of me. And I've always been in like a service job or caring for people. And so it's one of those things that if I'm not in it, I have no business being in it.
Right. So it almost has to be driven by purpose, right? Almost those intrinsic values has to be connected to all those things.
Absolutely.
And Charlie, I think this is kind of an unfair question that we're just talking about what, grit. You know what I mean? Like I have a good score on grit, but then you can ask me about something else like my eating habits and I'm probably a 1, but I believe that a lot of this goes back to our upbringing and professions that we had. Like I've been in law enforcement, I've been in those very structured, very gritty field for a long time. So I could see why my score looks different. The way my dad's a Southern guy, so the way he trained us up, he was a football coach, college coach, so you look at all your behaviors from the past that created this grit in my life. And so I think that's something we got to also remember is our current situation is always like there's evolution and always changing, right? Just right now we might not be gritty, but tomorrow we're taking on that new task that's hella gritty.
That's right.
If that makes any sense.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing that, Brock, because what you just brought into this is we are whole people, right? A screening tool does not sum you into one piece, right? It sums you into something that you can use as a tool to help grow yourself, right? And one thing that me and Todd, we always joke around a lot with each other, but one thing whenever we both filled out the grit score, and I seen that his grit score was higher than mine, I immediately started to work on my grit score, right? Because I'm competitive. So kind of going back to that piece with Brock talking about that, right? As I grew up competitive, so I'm going to make sure whenever I see those scores come out, I'm going to be like, oh wait, I know me being able not to concentrate on something. Well, now I'm going to start concentrating on that a whole lot more now. And now I'm like, okay, now I got to get my score higher than Todd's. So anyway, go ahead, Todd.
And I think you hit something, Charlie, and with everybody, they mentioned passion with the grit, and some things they're more passionate about. And, you talked about your value of competitiveness. And I'm saying that I think we can coach grit, because when we talk about, coaching and we talk about change is linked to emotion, which are linked to our values. And when you can help the client recognize their values and you can lean into that emotion as a coach that drives that change, they can up their grit in certain areas.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you for bringing that up, Todd. Is really these tools should be tools that you all use in your coaching session, right? Is now you have a grit score to be able to help people. You have these questions, right? Even just whenever Armando was talking about his grit score, right? I immediately said the one question that we talk about even in coaching, right, is what does that score mean to you, right? Even just starting on a simple, playing field of that, right? By approaching it with curiosity can also be another way of implementing into that. But I agree with Todd. I think we can most certainly coach people. I hate to say it this way, but coach people up into grit. I don't know if up is the right word, but you can definitely be able to coach around grit for sure. Let's see, anybody else? All right. Well, hopefully this was a good exercise. I do think in the bigger picture, having and being able to talk about grit, right? Now we have a definition of, resilience, right? That we can work off of. We can definitely build resilience. Research shows it. And if we prepare for and build that capacity, then that can also help us with our grit score, right? If we're constantly focused on a plan to be able to move us forward and be able to drive these things, then we can most certainly be able to impact it, much like Todd is saying. So what is compassion? So whenever we talk about mindful resilience for compassion fatigue, we also need to have a definition for compassion. And here is a feeling of deep sympathy or sorrow for another person who's stricken with some type of misfortune. And you know, I feel like compassion is so much more than that, right? I feel like it's a combination of empathy and sympathy, and you know, it's more than just saying that you're kind of feeling sympathetic. The next paragraph is often discussed in relation with empathy, right? And whenever I think of empathy, you know, I think that is something completely different, but at the same time as a component of compassion, right? You have to have empathy, in my opinion, to be able to be compassionate. You have to have sympathy, in my opinion, to be able to be compassionate. So there's so many different things, in my opinion, that goes into compassion. And to truly be, or this is a definition, is to truly be present and in the state of compassion, you may experience moments of darkness or heaviness. How many people have working in the helping profession has ever felt that those moments of darkness, of heaviness whenever they're working with patients or people? I shouldn't call them patients, right? They're just people. Yeah, absolutely, right? You kind of feel that doom and gloom with them sometimes, right? Whatever it is, you know, you almost want to cry with them, whether it's a looming diagnosis, whether it's they just failed out of college or they just got a DUI, whatever it is, right? That doom and gloom moment. I feel like we all feel it because we have that compassion for people. We know that maybe we were one wrong step away from being in that same scenario, right? Of whatever it is. And then we have that compassion. But then whenever we think about compassion fatigue, and this is really a state of exhaustion and dysfunction of physically, mentally, and emotionally as a result of a cumulative impact of burnout, vicarious trauma, traumatic stress, and triggering of your own personal issues, countertransference, to the point where you no longer feel empathy towards your patients and others, and they have nothing left to give. I will say, me personally, I have been at that place with working with patients. There is definitely no doubt in my mind, and I feel like if you say that you haven't been at that point, then you haven't worked in the field long enough to feel that way about it. I think it's coming, you know, if you hadn't felt that way, you know, to have that fatigue, and really that's what this part right here, oh gosh, I don't have my laser. Is what I usually always point to, right? Is whenever you have nothing left to give, whenever you're getting ready to show up to that patient, or you're showing up to that person you supervise, or you're showing up to whoever it is, and you really have nothing left to give, you are at that point, right? If you don't even feel like you can give them a reflection, you are burnout, right? Because whenever you think about give, it doesn't have to be anything, right? It's just holding the presence. Those coaching foundational things that we do, right? Providing reflections, asking those deeper inquiry questions, right? Reflecting on emotion, right? If we don't feel like we can give that, more than likely we're probably feeling compassion fatigue. If we can't even give them the basic foundation of coaching, we're probably there, right? We need to start thinking about that. And then we need to start developing a plan. But what really, you know, I usually ask this is compassion worth it? You know, and it helps those we offer it to. It allows us to connect. In my opinion, compassion is needed in the world. I don't know if we have enough compassion. So whenever I think about, is it worth it? It might take a term or such a physical response on your body and those other things to have that compassion fatigue and to have those things. But without it, you know, we turn into a society that we probably don't want to be. Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
Just a quick story to illustrate a little bit about this, and then I'll try not to confuse the issue. But one of my coaches last week, I got a message from her on the way home. She just found out that her cousin out back in Montana passed away. And I said, whatever you need for me to support you, help you get through this. And she came to work the next day, saw her first veteran, her first client, and I talked and I debriefed with her today. I had a face-to-face meeting with her today because she went home after 2 hours of work that day, and she goes, I saw that first person. I had zero empathy. I just wanted to tell them to pull their own head out of there and get out of here. You don't have real problems and everything. And she recognized that. She went home because she couldn't be present for her things to recharge. That's all a good thing. But I say that story to say, I don't know if you call this a Toddism or anything, but compassion fatigue confuses me because I like to think of it more as empathy fatigue, you know, because I like empathy is about that client, you know, it's the feelings that you have and that understanding that you have for what that client's going through, where compassion is about both of you. And, you know, we'll talk about it in some later slides, but, you know, if we're truly practicing compassion, we can help manage that compassion fatigue because compassion is applied to self as well.
Absolutely. That's a great point, right? Is compassion is most certainly applied to yourself. And yeah, definitely if you're sitting in front of that client and you have nothing left to give, right? You have no empathy left to give, right? You are at that phase for sure. And you know, life happens to us as well. And I think sometimes we forget about that. Or let me say the profession forgets about that. Our clientele forgets about that. We don't allow ourselves to give us that grace many times because we, you know, I forget, I think it was actually me and Todd who was just talking about this the other day, was many times in the field, right? Like for many years, actually, I still don't think to this day I've taken too many vacations that took off the entire like week, and I used different holidays to make it longer, right? I always took off something like Thursday to Tuesday, right? So I can include the weekend and it had minimal impact to my clientele and to the job that I was working, right? And that's usually the mentality is you can't take off, you can't do those things without hurting your clientele. And I do think the culture's changing, but you know, it's definitely important to think about. Causes of compassion fatigue. Here we have professional isolation. So for everybody who's going to be in a private practice, professional isolation will be a real thing. You need to have a network. You need to go and actually meet with people if you're doing nothing but virtual coaching, whether it's virtually, go have some coffee with some other coaches locally, go do something. But professional isolation will be real if you develop a private practice. Poor boundaries. That goes back to kind of that countertransference. If you pick a population, now I forget what we use, but let's just say it was you're using a population of weight management, and then that's the population you want to work with. Sometimes we have poor boundaries whenever we work with those populations. A difficult client population. You know, this definitely is challenging. I think we talk about it in this course, but if not, maybe I can find a way to put this in. But I also have another course that is whole health for pre and postvention to suicide. And we really talk about suicide prevention and things like that. People who work in suicide prevention, you know, that is a difficult population that nobody wants to work with. You know, the research shows it and supports it. In one article that I have in there, in one research study, it was 85% of people who work with suicidal patients tend to lie or minimize their symptoms so they don't have to address them with working with suicidal patients. That's a real fact, right? So if you see somebody in front of you, you're more likely to try not to say things that would provoke them to say that they're suicidal because you don't want to deal with the legal risk of it, right? And the system has created that for us. So, you know, working with these difficult populations like those, you know, it's very critical for us to realize compassion fatigue. Long hours and few resources. I'm sure we've all dealt with that at times. Ambiguous success, right? Failure to live up to one's own expectation, lack of social support, lifestyle choices, maturity and experience, and then lack of correct, compassionate perspective. So, you know, just being able to look at some of these and know that if you're going to go into a population that you have a strong connection with, right, that you're probably going to have poor boundaries. So what are you going to do to put in place for those poor boundaries, right? What kind of things can you put in place to help you with that? And then of course, consequences, I think we know about all these, right? So reduced productivity, increased absenteeism, loss of personal effectiveness. You know, again, this is probably, in my opinion, one of the most devastating is now, you know, I always hear the work-life balance question, right? Or the question, or maybe the pull. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that TED Talk to where they talk about work-life harmony. We need to stop calling it balance, that there has to be such a rigid thing between you and work. And it's not really that way. It needs to be something that we've talked about. It needs to be something that's intrinsically valuable to you, something that you enjoy showing up and doing. And if not, then it's going to bleed into that home. But if you are not really focused on overcoming compassion fatigue, burnout, vicarious trauma, lack of empathy, whatever we call it, if you don't have a plan in place, then it is going to impact your home life. There is no way that it will not impact your home life. So now you're letting something that your career has now dictated into your personal life. And to me, if you're not developing those types of plans, you shouldn't allow that work to kind of impede on your home. Psychological distress, we know if we're burnt out at work, it's going to cause stress on us. We're going to be more depressed. We're going to be more anxious, all those different pieces. And then, of course, increased risk for medical mistakes. And, maybe this may not apply, but if you're burnt out, you're going to make more mistakes, even if it is just regular work or whatever it is. It's just a common, more errors. So treating compassion fatigue, right? We've already been working on this. It's really awareness is the first step. So now we have a definition of that resilience, right? We have a definition of grit. We've talked a little bit about compassion fatigue. And then now let's talk a little bit about, go ahead, Todd, before I jump in.
Something to add there, with that becoming compassionate in a consciously mindful way. In the nature of coaching, because of our communication style and the relationship that we establish in a safe space, people are going to tell us stuff as coaches that may not necessarily apply to the goal and everything like that. And I've experienced it, and I've dealt with coaches that have just come out, that was heavy. And, and it can be draining to people. And, one of those, for my own benefit, one of those mindfully, conscious ways of dealing with it is that perspective shift, instead of that sympathy, oh, that's so bad that happened to someone. Switching that up, that other person, I created a safe enough space that other person trusted me enough, and I was able to give them the gift to truly listen to them. And it's just something that it's worked for me, and it's worked for some other people, because you're going to hear stuff.
You will. That's a very good point. You will hear stuff. It will impact you, right? It is going to happen. And sometimes, you think you have a coach and you're like, oh, well, I'm not going to get into anybody's past. I won't hear about anybody's, sexual trauma or war trauma or, whatever it is, right? Of whatever that is. But we all know we are whole people, right? So sometimes that trauma piece may be a whole lot more in your face whenever they show up to that coaching session. If they created that space, like Todd was saying, they might end up opening up to you more than they would even their own therapist. So, something else to keep in mind. Okay, so kind of moving in, now we're going to look at 5 tools. So now we've been able to do it. So now this is going to be able to really expand that window of tolerance to be able to help you, right, rebuild that grit or rebuild that resilience, maintain that grit, and be able to drive forward. So now we're going to move into a tangible plan. First thing, so these are 5 tools that, in my opinion, and research shows it, so I guess it's not just my opinion, that you should implement into your day, right? So one is breathing techniques, meditation, mindful movements, guided rest, and gratitude. So breathing. There's a breathing technique that I tend to implement, and it's an extended exhale. But really focusing on your breathing really regulates your, sympathetic nerve or your parasympathetic nervous system. And whenever we're not focused on our breathing, we're taking short, shallow breaths, then what we are doing is we're inflaming our sympathetic nervous system. So whenever something pops off, like your kid throws something at you, or, so something that never would have made you mad. And I have a good example of this. I was carrying a desk out of my backyard the other day, and I had it held up with a dolly with one hand, like at an angle, and I'm at an angle like this, and my dog goes running by me to go out the gate, right? And it probably never would have hurt anybody, but right in that moment, from where I was balancing this, trying to watch 2 dogs, not let this desk fall over, I reached down and grabbed my dog real fast and kind of pushed him back, right? I probably never had no reason to do that. He wasn't in any danger, but my resiliency at that time wasn't that. My breath was shallow, everything, right? So my response in that moment wasn't something that I typically would do. So, that's just a good example of focusing on breath. So whenever we focus on breath, the thing that I tend to do is focus on an extended exhale, because that allows people to really get all of that oxygen out and then be able to do that. And we'll go ahead and do an exercise. But before we do this exercise, I'll say I did a breathing course. And inside that breathing course, we had a man who is kind of notorious now. He does playwriting and other things. He's a retired Green Beret. But his name is Scott Mann. He does rooftop leadership and other things. He's a great leadership guy. And he was in that course and he was a participant with us. But whenever we started talking, because he was a military guy, I was a military guy, I was with another military guy, and he started talking about the power of breath. And he was actually an FBI instructor along with a special forces instructor all at the same time when he retired. And there's one scenario whenever he would walk into it that all of these students failed, about 50% fail rate. And then what he did was he implemented this breathing technique before they went into that scenario and afterwards. And then that's pass rate jumped up to about 90%. So just implementing a simple breathing technique before they went into that scenario, that high intense scenario, allowed them to make a right decision at the right moment just by implementing a simple breathing technique. So if everybody would just sit with me for a moment, go ahead and find your breath. And then maybe here in a moment, go ahead and exhale everything out right now. And then we're going to start. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold, 2. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold, 2. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold, 2. All right, and now just go back to your normal breath. So that was literally the only exercise, and he did it for 3 to 5 cycles and implemented that beforehand. And that increased that pass rate to 90%. If you ever look him up, you know, like I said, his name's Scott Mann. He's a retired lieutenant colonel, Green Beret. I forget how many tours in Afghanistan he did. But, you know, that to me is a easy technique that we can give our people that we work with. I tend to start meetings off with our coaching sessions off with it and everything. Meditation. I don't know how many people here do meditation. You know, I will say, in my opinion, meditation comes in so many different forms. This can be prayer. This can be now I lost train of thoughts, but gardening is what I was going to say. It could be so many different things that you kind of get lost in the moment in and can meditate with. I do a meditative practice called iRest, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But this meditation practice that we kind of have here as a guide is a love and kindness practice. So, you know, being able to do this, I usually tell people this, is I worked with this other guy and he was a special operator, go figure, special operator. He held grudges very bad. And there was this one person in another service whenever we worked together that he absolutely hated, but we had to work together on a regular basis. So I told him, or I asked him if he would, to start doing a love and kindness practice every morning before he came to work. So he gave himself love and kindness, and then he gave this other person love and kindness who he historically hated. And it changed his perspective so much that they actually work together still to this day. I won't say that his perspective changed, but his approach to her changed, right? Because he still doesn't like her. He has a good reason not to. You know, I don't think anybody really has a good reason not to like people, but you know, at the end of the day, you know, that's his good reason and he's sticking to it. But just being able to implement that love and kindness allowed him to be able to show up at work and be able to be in meetings with this person that he doesn't like. So that's the power of love and kindness. The next thing that we'll do and talk about is a mindful movement practice. Here we talk about yoga. We're going to do a different one. Todd's going to lead us in a Tai Chi practice. We forgot to change yoga on this page, but yoga and Tai Chi, in my opinion, are interchangeable practices. Todd may disagree because he's more of a Tai Chi practitioner. I'm more of a yoga practitioner, but in my opinion, they're very complementary. It's really about mind body movement at the end of the day, and spirituality. Both of them combined all those things to really come up with a good practice. But really kind of having a movement practice. I'll also say for folks who lift weights or do all that other stuff, in my opinion, I know I've said this before, but if you're lifting kettlebells or whatever it is, right? You got to be present if you're lifting weights. So in my opinion, if it's lifting weights, whatever it is, some type of movement practice. But now I will turn this off and stop sharing and turn this over to Todd for a minute.
Can you go ahead and spotlight me, Charlie? I don't have that power. There you go. And I'm gonna, as Charlie said, go ahead and take everybody through a little bit of Tai Chi. And the Tai Chi that I practice is called applied or adaptive Tai Chi, and we can do this seated or standing. And I guess I'm gonna stay seated just so I can stay in the camera a little better. Everybody hear me okay? Because I'm slid back a little bit. All right, and if you're seated, I'm gonna invite you to, to sit up straight, sit like a mountain. We want our shoulders level and our head level. If you want to do it standing, start with your feet together, and then go ahead and shift your weight to your right foot, step that left foot off, about shoulder width, come down on the heel or toe heel. And now if you're standing, weight slightly back on your heels and your knees are flexed a little bit, and just feel like you got roots going through your heels and you're connected to the ground. And when we talk about Tai Chi, it's been around for about 3,500 years, and it loosely translated, Tai means ultimate or universal, and Chi means energy. And in the Chinese philosophy, Chinese medicine, Chi, we're born with a certain amount of it. We have some within us, but it's all around us, and we can gather Chi. And one of the gathering forces of Chi is our breath. And we're just going to start off with, if you're seated, go ahead, arms hanging naturally down at your side. If you're standing, same thing. We're just going to start off with gathering Chi. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to take our arms, palms up, and we're just going to float them up to the outside. Inhaling as we go up. And then they come together over our head, and we exhale as we push down. And we're inhaling up. And exhaling down. And here, if you can't inhale all the way up and exhale all the way down, that's okay. I invite you, just breathe with intention. We want to notice our breath, be very conscious of our breath. And another little trick as we're going through this gathering Chi is just if we take our tongue and touch it to the roof of your mouth, just the roof, your top row of teeth, it kind of acts as a circuit breaker, or makes you more efficient at gathering Chi, which that Chi meridian, there's 14 meridians in the body. That Chi meridian runs right up our front and right down the back. And we're inhaling up. And we're exhaling down. And we're going to go one more up. We're going to exhale down. And now when we get down to the bottom, we're going to go ahead and just turn our palms over at center, and we're going to inhale up through center. Inhaling up. Exhaling down. And we're using slow, fluid movements. Go one more up. And we're going to exhale down. We're going to do one more little warm up, and this is a move that's going to be in both the forms that I'm going to show you. And I'm going to talk you all the way through it. But again, we're going to sit like that mountain. If you're standing, you stand like that tree. Shoulders level, head level, and we're going to float those arms up to the front to about shoulder height. Then we're going to push down like we're pushing a log down into the water. We want to turn our torso to the right and bring that left hand up so it's about eye level, and this bottom hand is just going to float around, follow along with it. And we're just going to turn at our midsection. Our core is turning all the way to the left, and then our hands are going to pass each other at 3 and 9 o'clock. And then we're going to turn our body the other way. And again, we're hands pass, and we're waving hands like clouds. Turning, hands pass. And now again, breathing with intention. Trying to inhale across. Exhale as our hands pass. But it's also more important just to make sure you're breathing with intention. You're noticing your breath. And once we get all the way turned back, again, our movements initiated at the core. We're going to float those arms out, shoulder height, come to center, and just sink it down. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the first form of the two that I'm going to show you, and this is just for form one. There's 4 moves in this form. The first one is brush knee, push hand. The second one is going to be cloudy hands, and then we got, which we just did, then we got Jade Girl works the shuttle, and white crane spreads its wings. And I'm going to talk you through it and give you thorough instructions. But again, sit like that mountain, shoulders level, head level. Just take a couple cleansing breaths. As we go through this, breathe with intention. We're going to float those arms up to the front again. We're going to push down like we're pushing a log down into the water. Left hand is going to block to the right. We turn our core. We reach that right hand back behind us like we're grabbing a pie off the shelf. It comes up even with our head. And now this bottom hand is just going to push in front of our knees. And that top hand turning at the core, we're pushing that pie into somebody's face. That's brush knee, push hand. This top hand turns back towards us, and we've done this one. This is wave cloudy hands. Then the hands pass, and we wave cloudy hands in the other direction. This top hand drops down by our floaty ribs. Bottom hand comes up to block the sun. And now we're going to turn our core again, pushing that bottom hand out and turning that top hand over. That's Jade Girl works the shuttle. Now this top hand is going to be a big circular motion as it scoops underneath what was our bottom hand as we turn all the way back in the other direction. We got a beach ball here now. Now this top hand is going to drive down and the bottom hand is going to float up. And that's white crane spreads its wings. This top hand is going to drive down and across. This bottom hand reaches back, gets that pie off the shelf, brings it up. And now we're going to push that pie into somebody's face. That's brush knee, push hand. Top hand turns into that cloudy hand. We're waving cloudy hands. Then our hands pass. We're waving cloudy hands. Top hand drops down, bottom hand comes up. And now that bottom hand's going to push out as we turn. Top hand turns over. Jade Girl works the shuttle. Now we're scooping. We got that beach ball. We're turning. Top hand pushes down. Bottom hand floats up. White crane spreads its wings. We drive down and across. We reach back. We grab that pie. Brush knee, push hand. Top hand's that cloudy hands now. Hands pass. We're waving cloudy hands. Top hand's dropping down, bottom hand comes up. Now we're doing Jade Girl works the shuttle. Scooping, turning, pushing down, floating up, white crane spreads its wings. Driving down and across, reaching back, remembering to breathe. Brush knee, push hands. Cloudy hands. Cloudy hands the other way. Top hand drops down by those floaty ribs, bottom hand comes up. Jade Girl works the shuttle. Scooping, we're gritting that beach ball as we're turning. Pushing down, floating up. White crane spreads its wings. Follow me. Breathe with intention. The mind controls the body, and the body's moving those arms. It's coming from the core. I'm going to invite you to float those arms out to about shoulder height. Come to the front. Push down like you're pushing a log down in the water. Relax, shake it out if you need to. Now we're going to do a second form. This form's got part the wild horse's mane, needle to the bottom of the ocean, cloudy hands, and lift heaven and push earth. So again, sit like that mountain. And as we go through this, I invite you to always breathe with intention, breathe with a purpose. It's one of the driving forces of that chi. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to, again, float those hands up to the front to about shoulder height. Push down like we're pushing a log down in the water. Turning to our left and bringing that right hand under the left, about 6 to 8 inches apart. And now the top hand's going to push down and that bottom hand's going to throw out like you're throwing a frisbee. And now it ends up out here like you're reading a book, and that's part the wild horse's mane. Now this top hand is going to drive down and across. Bottom hand comes up, knife edge to the temple. And now this bottom hand is just going to push the water out of the way as we spear a fish. Think about it that way. So we're just going to push the water out of the way, turn our bodies, spear the fish. That's needle to the bottom of the ocean. Your needle hand turns into cloudy hand. And we're just going to wave cloudy hands. Then we wave cloudy hands the other way. Then once we get turned at the core, our hands float. We come back to center. We turn back the opposite direction. That lead hand comes in, centered on the sternum. And now this hand that's still out is going to push down. And that hand that's on the sternum is going to float up for lift heaven, push earth. Now this top hand's going to scoop down underneath that bottom hand, 6 to 8 inches. Turning, top hand pushes down. We throw the frisbee. Part the wild horse's mane. Drive down and across. Knife edge to the temple. Move to water. Spear to fish. Needle to the bottom of the ocean. Needle hand turns into cloudy hand. Hands pass. Cloudy hands back the other way. Once we get turned, our hands float. Shoulder height back across the water. Lead hand comes in, centered on the sternum. Top hand pushes down. We uncoil that spring for lift heaven, push earth. Scooping, 6 to 8 inches. Pushing down, throwing the frisbee. Driving down and across. Knife edge to the temple. Move that water, spear that fish. Needle to the bottom of the ocean. That hand becomes cloudy hand. Hands pass, follow the hands the other way. Now we're floating back across that water. Lead hand comes in, bottom hand pushes down, floating up. Lift heaven, push earth. Follow me. Breathe in with intention. Mind controls the body. Body moves the arms. Slow, fluid movements. Breathing with intention. Now I'm going to invite you to float those arms in. Come to center. Sink it down. And now I'm just going to invite everybody do a qigong move with me. And for this is called Tiger Plays with the Ball. And I said chi is energy. And as we're doing this, maybe you can feel, or if you close your eyes, see the energy between your hands. But we're just going to go ahead and float our arms up to about shoulder height. We're going to push down like we're pushing a log down in the water. And then right about belly button level, I just invite you to bring your hands 2 to 3 inches apart. And just keep them in front of you. And then just start moving your hands around each other. And maybe you can feel that energy. And then as you're doing this, I invite you to just go ahead and start moving at the core. And just moving. And this is a mindful activity. We're breathing with intention. And I already told you that breath is one of the driving forces of chi. And maybe you're doing this and you're saying, I feel some tingling in my hands. But you just had us moving, Todd, and that's just the blood flowing through my fingers. Well, the other driving force of chi is our own blood. And so what you're feeling, that's your blood, but it's also that chi, that energy coursing through you. We just do this a little bit. Just float those arms out to the front. Come back to center, sink it down. And we're going to close by lifting heaven. Pushing earth. And a traditional martial arts salute. Open left palm, right fist. Thank you. And if Charlie stops spotlighting me, because I hate staring at myself, I'm always open for what you guys think. What'd you think of that?
I thought it was cool. It's a good way to kind of relax a little bit and get that movement, especially like in the core and the like thoracic spine, which a lot of people don't have that movement. So, and kind of controlling the breathing. So I at points where I felt where my breathing was a little chaotic, and then I kind of caught myself, and then I was like, okay, let me exhale, inhale, and kind of control it a little bit better. So it
Uh,
just kind of helped me control. Um,
breathing with intention, and
Yeah.
and the movement. Tai Chi started as a real martial art with external applications, and it's become this internal martial art. It's not necessarily about hardness externally, but making us a little tougher internally. But it's really, it can't help but be a mindful activity. We were all doing all kinds of stuff, plus focusing on our breathing. I mean, if we're truly doing it and we're immersed in it, not a lot of other thoughts can jump into our head. Anything else?
For me, it shows how much I need to do things like this because that was like extremely uncomfortable for me. Uh, it just didn't feel and I think it's just because I always just keep going. And I never take that time to like just stop. So now I just want to go to sleep. So it feels good now, but it was a very, very uncomfortable feeling doing it.
Would it be fair to say, Shaquan, if we ask our body will tell us?
Yeah.
But we have to listen, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else, any thoughts on that?
I wanted to add, there's so much research that shows that this helps more than psychotherapy. Then why is this not in every behavioral health clinic nationwide? Why is yoga not, right? Why is that not an intervention that mental health therapists are utilizing inside of,
There's
behavior?
a recent paper published also, Charlie, that a regular Tai Chi practice has as much impact on blood pressure as 150 minutes of moderate cardiovascular activity a week.
I mean, isn't that crazy just to think about focusing on breath and mind? And Armando, I don't know if you've seen a lot of this research that's been coming out too, that even in weightlifting, it's more focused on breathing and weightlifting now than it has ever been, right? Because breathing through those types of lifts that you're doing, let's just use bench press, right? If you're breathing through it, before they've always focused on breathing, but not as much as they do now, right? It's more has shown that that oxygen enriched blood is circulating and focusing on those muscles. It helps with rehabilitation. It helps with, muscle mass. It helps with all those different pieces by just focusing on the breath, even while you're exercising with heavy weight.
And that last move we did, I'm pretty Western brained, and I had a hard time wrapping my head around me that you could actually feel the chi or the energy. And I said, well, that's just my blood coursing through my fingers. I just did all this, so the blood's flowing and I can feel it. And somebody better educated in Chinese medicine, Chinese philosophy says that's okay. That conflict isn't there because blood is one of the driving forces of chi. That's what's coursing through you, that energy, the nutrients and the oxygen that your blood is carrying through your body and you're feeling in your fingers is really chi. And I actually had a veteran that he would get up in the morning after and he would do tiger plays with ball with his eyes closed. And he said his energy ball had different colors to it. And if he saw a burnt orange, he said, I'd keep doing it until it turned blue. Because if it's burnt orange, every bad thing in my life is going to act up that day and it's going to be a bad day. So that was his wake up routine. He'd get up, put his feet on the floor, and just do tiger plays with ball until he got the right color of energy that he wanted, and then he says his days were better.
Yeah, I just I hear those types of stories, and then it still just blows my mind that in Western medicine we're focused on evidence-based protocols and mental health, right? Whenever people know their body's better than everybody else, right? And I may have said this before, but at the Wellness Effect, that is our goal, is we're going to be implementing this into every evidence-based protocol, into foster care, into mental health counseling, and we're going to have mental health clinicians doing yoga and personal training, all the way from physical therapists who are doing mental health counseling and doing different things like that. So I think there's such an overlap in everything that we do. All right, any other questions for Todd on that? Or anything else on your end, Todd? Any other Toddisms? Go ahead.
Oh.
Oh, okay.
I have a question. Is there like a certain routine or way to do this that you would recommend? Or just any video that showed us how to do it?
I wouldn't say any video, that's for sure. I would say well, actually, I should probably let Todd speak to this, but I would say Dr. Zubin Guo, I think, has a YouTube channel that he has a lot of different ones on. If I was to advise you to go watch YouTube channels, if you're going to do this at home, those would be the ones that I would advise you to watch. There's also another one, and this is the one that I learned from, and his name is Peter Wayne. He has a YouTube channel as well. I'll say though, Zubin Guo, in my opinion, is far superior than the other one. But I'll let Todd talk.
And I'll say Tai Chi is like other martial arts. There's different schools, there's different styles. And I said that I trained under Zibun Wu, and he developed the applied adaptive Tai Chi, and everything that he does can be done seated, standing. It can be done with foot movement. There's a special walk in Tai Chi. So it's the adaptive, and a part of it is it can be done by all ability levels. Like even if I can only move my right arm because I suffered from a stroke, you can still do the movements as far as you can do them. And I just, in my mind, I picture that other one, and you can Google applied adaptive Tai Chi and Zibun Wo will come up. It's ZBINGUO. And he's got some different YouTube videos. And if you do go look at him, don't compare me to him. I've been doing it for 5 years. He's been doing it for 45 years. Okay.
Zubin, he's a great guy, and if y'all ever get to learn from him, he's actually there in so for Jennifer, other Tennessee folks, he's in Chattanooga, Tennessee, is where we ended up connecting with him. He works at the University of Chattanooga, and does a lot of research and different things on Tai Chi. I think his PhD's in anthropology, which I thought was kind of weird.
Medical anthropology.
Medical anthropology. Well, that makes it a little bit better. I still think it's weird, but I just don't know anthropology. So let's go ahead. Actually, yeah, let's go ahead and take about a 10-minute break. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's be back at 6:55. So really like an 8-minute break.
So did you give up on Duke because Coach K left? Now you're wearing an Air Force hat?
I figured, I might as well pick another team fast, but I like blue, so I had to go one way. Now my daughter's been at the Air Force Academy the past 2 weeks. Tomorrow's her last day doing, they have camps every summer for the various sports. She did basketball last week and volleyball this week. And, I think it's pretty cool to send her over there. It's a student ran initiative, so the students are the ones running it that are there. And then they put on all these camps and their athletes and the coaches and just different things. I think it's pretty cool. So, and then they mix military culture. I mean, I'm sure it's all a recruitment tool. It's probably they use
Air
recruitment.
Force isn't the military.
Right. So, but they're always like at the end of each day, they're talking about like Medal of Honor winners, or they're talking about something cool, or, today they had a person who was in the Air Force who was a professional volleyball player that went to the Air Force Academy. So then she talked about those things, which I thought was, a unique experience. But it is the Air Force.
Corporate America.
I mean, the only thing worse than the Air Force is definitely the Coast Guard, so.
I don't think the Coast Guard knows what department they belong to.
I didn't even know they were a department.
Do I belong to Homeland Security? Do I belong to DOD? Am I law enforcement? Am I military? They don't know.
They don't know anything. All right, let me start sharing again here. All right. Well, hopefully everybody can hear me and they're starting to come back. And hopefully everybody sees Tai Chi up here and mindful movement. We have Tai Chi right here. I won't cover any of this stuff because Todd pretty much covered it. But in my opinion, Tai Chi is a great exercise or a great mind-body practice to implement because you don't need a mat, you don't need anything, right? All you need is your body and to be able to focus on it. So guided rest. So whenever we talk about guided rest, we're talking about yoga again, but there's yoga nidra is what they call it. And I don't know if anybody here has ever practiced yoga nidra, but ultimately you sit down and you practice for basically 45 minutes of a guided meditative practice. And whenever I think of that guided meditative practice, it's really guiding you down a journey over your body, over your mind, and over your spirit. And ultimately, that's the journey. There's a lot of research that shows doing a 45-minute to an hour practice of yoga nidra is equivalent to gaining 4 hours of sleep, 3 to 4 hours of sleep. It is not in a replacement of that, but if you did this in the middle of your day, whenever you are feeling tired and less energetic, this is a great intervention. And Shaquan, to kind of answer some of those questions, where could you find a good yoga nidra practice, or if you wanted to do that, one of the things is Insight Timer. Insight Timer has a great one. I'm trained in what's called integrative restoration, and it's called IREST for short. It is a tier 1 modality, and actually in the DoD system, you can bill being an IREST practitioner. So, and you don't even need an education to do that, right? So you can become a certified IREST teacher and then get credentialed in the DoD system and then start providing IREST and get reimbursed for it. That's how much they believe in it. And I'll tell you a little history behind it is, it started off as IREST, and a guy named Richard Miller started it, and he started it in at the beginning of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And whenever he started it, he started calling it Yoga Nidra, and they started doing research around it at Walter Reed. And then finally, it had so much research, and they wanted to move forward with it. And then he went to whoever was over the hospital at the time, whatever they call them, captains or generals or whatever they were in the Navy. But he went to that person, and that person basically said, there is no way I'm going to have Yoga Nidra in my hospital system. He's like, I can't get behind Yoga Nidra. I want nothing to do with it. So then he went back to the drawing board and ended up coming up with integrative restoration. And whenever you look up IREST, it's a little I with a big R rest, right? Little I, big R rest, just like the iPod, right? Because that's also what came out at about the same time. So that's kind of the history of iRest, but it's a modern version of Yoga Nidra. Another part of this practice is really coming up with a gratitude, right? So the first thing we did is we focused on breathing. We developed a meditative practice. We implemented some mindful movement, and then we did some type of guided rest every day. And then now we're having a gratitude practice. And, you know, almost that example that I gave earlier of giving that love and kindness practice for Stephen towards that other person. You know, that was a gratitude practice really, because we were providing gratitude towards somebody that he didn't really like. But really just having a gratitude practice in general, there's a lot of research behind it. Also affirmations, right? That's another thing. I'll say the research shows that affirmations aren't really anything, you know, to implement into your life, but it's also, in my opinion, giving you that guidance almost every day, that northern star of having that type of self-talk at the beginning of every day. So mindful resilience for compassion fatigue, the act of recognizing, preventing, treating compassion fatigue is not something that you do once. This is a process. You know, I always tell people, you know, tools in the tool shed does not build a house. So if you keep those tools in your tool shed and you never pull them out and sharpen them, you're never going to be able to build a house. So we have to pull those tools out. We have to practice with them. We have to play around with them. We have to grow them. And we have to be able to do that. If we don't, we're going to continue to feel burnout. We're going to continue to feel compassion fatigue, have that vicarious trauma, and then we're going to continue those cycles. So the next thing I want everybody to fill out is I put a link in the chat. I don't know if everybody got to see it. Is now I'm going to give y'all about 10 minutes to fill this one out. And then we will come back and debrief this. So this one is the professional quality of life assessment. Does anybody not have the link to be able to fill out? All right, then I'll be quiet and give y'all a few minutes. All right. Does anybody still need some more time? This one's a little bit longer than the last one we did, but feel good? All right. So now whenever y'all think about this one and filling this one out, where do your scores line up on this one compared to what you were thinking? Or what did it feel like filling this one out?
Hello? All right. I'm sorry. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm surprised, but some of it was surprised. I mean, I think if you would have asked me this, or I would have done this 2 weeks ago, this would have been really bad. But right now it's good. My compassion score was a 45, and then which it says it's within the high range for compassion satisfaction. My burnout score is a 31, which falls within medium range for burnout, and then my secondary traumatic stress score is a 23, so medium range for the secondary traumatic stress. So yeah, I mean, I was surprised more about the burnout because I have been feeling like very burnt out, but I think after yesterday it has lowered. So that's why I was a little surprised, but at the same time I'm like, okay, I can kind of see that it's going down, I think. I mean, I've never done it before, but I would assume that it would have been way higher than what it is. And I don't know much about the secondary traumatic stress. I'm assuming like that what I received from someone else that I help, I'm assuming. Right.
So
Okay. Yeah.
basically,
So
if you had to hear somebody talking about being sexually abused, that could potentially lead to vicarious or secondary trauma. So
gotcha.
something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say I experienced that now, but I did experience that in the military. So I was counting those times that I was in the military with Cuban migrants. And so that's why I think that score was there. But I think that's it. Yeah. It's pretty cool.
No,
And I
but
think,
I think you
sorry.
hit on something was that it matters in time and space on when you're filling this out, right? Even a 2 week period could probably change it. Actually, probably a 24-hour period could probably change it if you just got reamed by your boss on something that was completely not your fault, or you're dealing with a difficult patient and you're like, I just get no support, right? Then you might feel a little bit different filling this out and answering those questions a little bit more jaded. Sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
I just can remember I did when I was getting my master's of rotation at the PTSD clinic, and I had the Vietnam veteran vets, and I had such secondary trauma. So I have experience, but again, that was a long time ago, but I know exactly what it's like experiencing when they get the details. So and it is like Armand said, though, I don't have that now, but I can remember it very vividly. Like you'd have the dreams and the things that they went through. So it's very real. It can happen.
What emotions were you feeling in that moment, or that you can remember?
I remember it's kind of fear because what they had gone through and what they ended up doing sometimes, it changed who they were. And so it was kind of like it could happen to any of us, and just the fear, some anger, and just some, disbelief. I can remember all of that, but I remember, and I could vision, they would speak about things and I could see it, and I could see it for a while. And the same thing happened when I worked for Children's Services. I finally had to quit because of, I don't know, I'll give y'all secondary trauma if I tell you, but just stories come across about abuse, and you're like, I can't do it anymore because I'm not going to be a good parent because I'm starting to have these effects. So I can remember times in my life, but I'm blessed now. I don't really have it, but there have been times when it starts making you have secondary trauma, you're jaded, you don't understand what's going on, you start to lose your emotions. It's kind of, I don't know, it's like your whole world, it's turned upside down.
No, thank you for sharing that. I asked about emotions specifically because also what did we learn today about resilience, right? The emotional domain is the one that will hit us the hardest, right? It'll deplete us the most. So, if we're working with these groups, right, and it's an emotional turmoil on us, right, it's going to deplete us so much more. And, if we're sitting around hearing Vietnam's, and I'll also say, typically, and I'll say this about any group, but I'll use it as a Vietnam era group, is whenever you're in there, that group forgets that other Vietnam veterans are not in that group, right? So they're talking their language, they're talking in the way that they talk, right? They're not holding back anything because they're among their peers. So that's also probably another reason why it was probably also, feeding off of one each other, hearing those stories and doing those things, it's um, pretty common thing to happen, especially if you get like-minded people into a group. It can be very, especially if they suffer the same type of, trauma or whatever you want to call it. It could be very, very much to where these people feed off of one another, and then have that vicarious trauma, because everything that she just listed, you could almost list as a PTSD symptom, right? As she was saying it, right? The emotion, all over the place with her emotions, thinking about it vividly, right? Having dreams about it. And you can almost go down the entire list and be like, okay, well, that makes perfect sense that this is PTSD style symptoms, right? Um, so thinking of that at work, even Brock, with the students that you're working with, right? That could also be another triggering environment for people. I mean, any environment that we work in can be a triggering environment whenever we do that. But I think with this professional quality of life measure, again, right, it matters on how we're brought up, to Brock's original point, and then to Armando's point, it can be, it could vary from freaking day to day, depending on what's going on. But definitely a 2-week period could shift your scores in different directions. But I think one thing to think about with this tool in particular is how easy could this be implemented with somebody who's struggling. If you're working with people in the professional domain of life and their professional life sucks, this is a great way to kind of point to them, right? To say, wait a minute, here goes these areas. Now, what are we going to do? We're going to build a practice revolving around breathing. We're going to build a practice around meditation, working out. Now I forget what the other one was. Guided rest and a gratitude practice. And we're going to build your resilience so that whenever these moments happen and your boss yells at you, or you're sitting there listening to another kid tell you about, their father hitting them or whatever it is, right? Like you're having to listen to that stuff over and over again. Now you can kind of see that spelled out here and develop that plan, right? And develop that and have those skills accessible and be able to implement that. So these are the tools that you can easily implement in the coaching that we've been able to implement here today. Go ahead, Todd.
I just want to point out too, last week we talked about trauma-informed care, and we talked about how trauma was very individualized. And when we're dealing with our peers and we see some of these signs, it's important that we don't necessarily jump to those judgments, that, maybe we're there and we're able to support them through some of this stuff as well. If you work for an agency or if you're not in private practice like that. And just that awareness and that understanding that it is individualized, because I could hear a story and no trauma where it could traumatize Charlie, and vice versa is the same thing.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's an individualized process, and we bring the whole person into that process, right? And sometimes people think triggers are solely something that somebody says, but if Todd was sexually assaulted in the military, and then me being a military man and I come up and put my arm around him, right? Just me putting my arm around him could be a triggering moment, right? Or even just coming up and just setting my arm on his shoulder as he's sitting there, right? Or something like that. Many times triggers can come in so many different forms. It can be nonverbal, it can be verbal, it can be an environment. And by God, I always tell people trauma too is like an elephant in a rearview mirror, right? If you're driving down the road, you sometimes might look in your rearview mirror and that elephant is way back there, and it's not bothering you. It's not anywhere near your car. It's not anywhere close to you. And then the next day, that elephant could be right up in that mirror, right? And you can see nothing else besides that trauma that day.
And you got to read that sign in the mirror. Objects in the mirror may be closer than they appear.
That's right. That's right. And then implement those skills, right? And then start pushing that elephant back away. But that really is, and I use that as a grief analogy too. Just really, whenever you have loss, you have something traumatic, it hits you differently no matter what, right? And it could be the way the wind is blowing, it could be a smell, it could be anything that triggered you that day. We also have to think about that whenever we approach our clients, but not just as we are working with our clients, right? I'm talking about as we approach our clients. If we're in a mood that we just should not be there that day, it's probably better for us to call in, because we could cause more damage in that person by showing up whenever we're not ready. Back to Todd's example of the guy that gets out of bed and checks his chi every morning. He knows, he knows on those days whenever it's not the right color that he probably shouldn't talk to too many people, I'd imagine. So, I mean, those are the things that we have to do, whether it's checking our chi, whether it's, getting our meditation journals out, whatever it is, we have to be able to focus for ourselves so that we can show up for other people and really be able to hold that space for them. All right. Well, let's see. Any questions, comments, concerns about resiliency, grit, or quality of life, or trying to implement this into coaching or implementing it in your own life? Forget about coaching, implementing these things into your own life, because eventually it'll come out in coaching if you implement it in your own life. All right, then I'll turn it over to Todd for the last little bit to talk about the stages of change.
All right. And specifically, I gotta make sure I got like 60 screens here. Share the right screen. We're gonna talk about coaching around those stages of change. Let me move this chat. And I'm gonna just request, invite, ask everybody, let's make this as interactive as possible. We're gonna do this as a group, and we're just gonna discuss how we coach around these stages of change. But before we do that, let's go ahead and speak into the room. What are the 6 stages of change? What's the first one?
Pre-contemplation.
All right. We got pre-contemplation. Second one.
Contemplation. I don't know if you want me to keep answering.
I don't mind your voice, Armando, but if I can get some other voices in the room, that'd be cool. We're thinking about thinking. Now we're thinking. And after we think, we're gonna
Preparation.
preparation. We're gonna prepare for. And once we prepare for something, we got to put it into
Action.
Action.
there you go. All right, JP. And once we've done it for a while, we should probably try to
maintain.
maintain. And this is just part of life. It's highly likely that once we've done it for a while, we may go back to
Relapse.
yeah, we may relapse or recycle, start over again. There's some research on how much that actually happens. But now we're gonna talk about pre-contemplation. And for the group, somebody tell me, how do you define this stage when we're talking about this?
This is the vacillation stage. Unsure.
Yeah, the vacillation stage. And a fancy book definition is not ready to change, does not intend to change in the next 6 months. Maybe we can talk, doesn't understand the benefits of change, lacks some of the knowledge around the change. But now I'm going to ask you got that client sitting across from you. What are some things that we think our client may say in this stage?
They're just not sure. They're still trying to think.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't see the reason to.
Yeah.
I won't. I can't.
Hmm.
That's the opposite of what we talk about change talk. For you, those of you that are in the course and we've gone through the course for a while, we got those qualities and skills of a coach. What kind of skills do you think we're using here?
I would say more of like a supportive role. You're kind of just, I wouldn't say you're not trying to change their mind. You're just kind of going with the flow. Like you're trying to go with what they're saying and maybe find another way, another thing they want to change, and maybe specifically not that, like that one thing that they may need to change, but they're not ready for it.
Yeah, in this stage, that when you talk about that supportive role, we're going to use our other focus listening. We're going to listen to understand where they're coming from. Are people entitled to feel the way they feel? Do
Yes.
people have that right to feel the way they feel about something? Yeah.
Yes.
We're going to affirm and validate that, those feelings are yours. That's the way you feel right now in this moment. And then we can also use our deeper inquiry to explore a little more about certain values and everything like that. What's the big thing we shouldn't do as a coach?
Listen.
No, we shouldn't do.
Oh, we should not do.
Should not do.
Oh,
Try to
judge
convince
or
them.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brock.
I just try to convince them. Try to change their mind. Like, yeah, ready. Come on, man, you can do it. Because if we're not ready, we're not ready.
Yeah. We shouldn't rush the process. As a coach, at this point, this stage, we got to trust the process. We should not become prescriptive or directive in our approach. Coaching is a guiding style. This isn't the point where we want to make those judgments. We shouldn't become judgmental and look at this person. And tell them, if you just do what I tell you to do, your life will be rainbows and unicorns. Because nobody does what they're told to do. They do what they want to do. So we should not switch that style. So, one of those other skills that we can do here is we can ask some questions for some deeper exploration to help them identify, those values, some strengths and stuff. What are just some sample questions that you think we could ask?
what do you think the change will bring to you, or
What are the benefits of changing?
benefits? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And get them to visually paint you a picture. What would your life look like in 5 years if you don't change? If you make no changes, what's your life look like in 5 years or 3 years? One of the other things, coaching is a strength-based approach. What's another question we can ask?
I would say I mean, going based off like when we did the stage one, like looking at their mission, their aspirations, their purposes, like there's a reason why they're there, they have their values. So you might want to ask, like, what are your strengths and how can that help you overcome this obstacle?
Yeah, help them identify those strengths. What experiences do you have trying to change in the past? And then we're using our other focus listening with that. We're going to pull out strengths with them, and sometimes the strength is simply us reflecting back. You learned what didn't work, because that is a strength. That is something that we can build on. We're a very strength-based profession, and just learning that can be useful and helpful for them, and we're constantly listening for that shift from that pre-contemplation, I won't, I can't, to that change talk. Well, that maybe, I can see myself doing this kind of talk as we're doing it. And we want to use our skill of reflecting whenever we hear that change talk to really reflect that back to them. And then this slide's going to look very familiar, except for the top is a different. So we're going to go through this one too. How do we define contemplation?
When they know that the change is going to benefit them, but they're still doubtful and they may not know how to do it fully.
We're going to see a little ambivalence here. This is the spot that, they can see some reasons for changing and they can see some reasons to stay the same. And what do you think we're going to hear the client saying this?
I want to do it, but I don't have time.
Yeah, I want to do it, but they're going to give you a reason for not to. This is a great thing for the yeah, but. I want to quit smoking. I know smoking's bad for me. Yeah, but then I won't be able to take those 15 extra breaks at work with my friends that I get. There's some ambivalence. They can see both sides. You know, and we talked a little bit about that decisional balance, that big pros and con list. Pros of change, cons of change, pros are not changing, cons are not changing. That's really something that we can use with a client in this stage. And what do you think, instead of what could what should the coach not do? What should the coach do in this stage?
I think you said one of them. I think running exercises like the pros and cons. That way you can show. There might be more pros than there is cons, so it maybe pushes them to be able to be like, okay, you know what, there is more pros than there is cons. It's time to change.
Yeah, and we're gonna honor that values conflict too, because they got a values conflict going on here with this change, and right now they haven't decided which one's gonna weigh heavier. We're gonna honor that in a non-judgmental approach, and one of the things we got is that double-sided reflection that we can use in here. You know,
On one hand.
one of the things is, like you enjoy your smoke breaks with your coworkers, and you know that smoking is taking years off your life. We honor that, we use that, and you know, but we're landing on the side of change. We're slowly guiding them towards some change. And then, we got some questions that we can ask at this stage too. And here's another. I love. It's a personal thing of mine. I like these visioning questions. Like, and I'm honing in on this one. If you quit smoking, what will your life look like in 5 years? And just getting them to paint that picture of the way they do it, and you can ask the question like, all right, let's jump ahead. You quit smoking, you haven't had a cigarette in 5 years. How will your life be different?
You just saved $2,500.
That's one thing that some people come out, and that's a value. Maybe they'll say, my new grandchildren will never know somebody that smoked, and they're not afraid to sit in my lap because I reek of cigarettes. That's another value that may come out, and we're able to really latch onto that. If that money's a high value item, $25. Follow-up question: $2,500. What could you do with $2,500? We're eliciting that change talk and getting them to see the possibility. We're invoking those reasons for change as we go through with this, and empowering them to really move forward. And now we got preparation. And how do we define preparation?
Is this like the actions of what will it take?
Yeah, you've already made the decision that you're going to change. And the way I look at these first three, pre-contemplation is really not thinking about it. Contemplation is you're thinking about it. You can see reasons for and against. And preparation, okay, the decision's made. I'm prepared to change. And what do you think the client's going to say in this stage?
This would be like the I want to, but how?
Yeah, I want to. I plan to. I'm going to. Yeah. And even you can even hear some trepidation, yet you can hear some excitement about the change. But then you can also hear some worry or fear of failure when they're getting into that change. And we're going to support our clients through this. Again, we offer that supportive environment, in that preparation stage. ways that we support the client through that in this preparation is this is where we're going to start setting those actual goals, that long-term goal, and those smart action steps. And we support the client by helping them smarten up those goals, because the more specific, measurable, the more it's action or behavioral in nature, and that we put time parameters out, the more they're going to be the more likely they're going to be successful. And we're able to assess the client's confidence, and if the confidence is less than that 7, we're able to explore, by asking what makes it a 7, and then ask you, what makes it a 7 instead of a 5 or a 6, and then listening for those strengths and being able to point those strengths out for the client. And what are some questions you suppose we ask in this preparation stage?
I would say how important the actual change you want to do. So like on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah, you can use those scaling questions, but think of those questions around that SMART goal. We're asking them, what's your first step you're willing to take? What's the first thing you're willing to do this? Get them to nail it down. When were you going to do it? Get them to identify that time. Explore those support systems. What's going to support you through this? Explore barriers. What's going to get in your way? And help them. What's your backup plan? Get them to develop that backup plan. And, those backup plans are pretty important, because old military adage, no plan survives first contact. We can anticipate those barriers, but we can never really fully identify every barrier that's out there, and having a backup plan is a way to go. So we weren't thinking about it. We thought about it. We're ready to, and now we're gonna put it in action. What's the definition of this action stage?
This is when you say, like, what do you need to do? What do we need to do to get started? What are you going to do by like next week and things like that?
Yeah, this is where they're actually putting things in work, and they've been working on developing a plan and to sustain the change. We got that long-term goal. They've been working on their action steps for roughly, a month or so, and moving towards that long-term sustainable change. And in this stage, what do you think the client's going to say?
Well, when I was doing the mock coaching, we came up with she came up with things that she needed to do in a week, just get started.
Yeah, the client's going to say, I will do this, or maybe they'll come back for a follow-up session. I attempted this. I tried that. And when we talk about the coach during this stage, what's our role?
Well, it's to help them. I think it's to help them win their plan, right? To reiterate what their goal is, to write down what their goal is, to help them create the steps to it, and then maybe accountability.
Yeah, and one of the best ways that a coach can help with that accountability is that environment that we create. We're going to normalize the obstacles, the setbacks with them as part of the learning process involved in behavioral change. We're going to assist them, just as Brock said, and maybe modifying their plan as they go forward, and helping them develop more contingency plans. When they first go out with their first action step, all the barriers are going to be perceived barriers. They're going to come back and see us, and they may not have anticipated all the barriers, and something else came up because life happens, right? We're going to help them develop plans to work around and come up with those contingencies. You know, what went well when, and we're going to ask questions like, what went well when you implemented this? What are some other questions we're going to ask as they're going through this?
What didn't go well?
What didn't go well? What barriers did you encounter? You
How
know,
did taking this action feel?
how did it feel? Yeah, Mark, look for that, and you know, and just being able to observe, you know, how did this feel? And sometimes people may say a little uncomfortable, but good all at the same time. And you're able to reflect back that you got out of your comfort zone, you stretched yourself, and just make it that observation, eliciting that change. And then we can use that confidence scale again to assess their confidence on completing their next step as they go forward with them. And when we look at these stages of change, we're in the action stage right now. Is it a linear process? Does everybody go pre-contemplation, preparation, action, boom, boom, and then we're gonna jump into maintenance next?
No.
You know, and can people, you know, through the coaching process, can they jump from stage to stage? What do we do with those clients, you know, that they were in action stage and they come back and something happened, a significant life event, and they come back, you know, I was working on this, maybe, I don't know. What are we doing in that situation?
I would say we're reassessing. So we're asking things like, how was, you know, the actions you've taken before? Is this something that you're still interested? If it is, do we need to change it according to your values, your mission, aspirations? Have that changed? So kind of going back to some of the previous stuff they provided and reflecting back on that and reassessing if the goal needs to change or all over completely, or just readjust the original goal into something that's a little bit more feasible.
Yeah, we're gonna reassess with the client, you know, and understanding where they're at, and we're we're using the stages of changes and not necessarily, it's a trans theoretical theory, it's a model that people go through. We're using it as coaches, not to put judgment or labels on the clients, but to allow us to meet the client where they're at, to help them on their change journey and on their change process. Then we got that last one, maintenance. In fancy book definition, maintenance has been a sustained behavior change for more than 6 months. You know, when somebody's sustained that behavioral change for a period of time, that's considered a maintenance. You know, it's become habit. What do you think you're going to hear the client say in this stage?
Hopefully they're celebrating their success of the change and how it's affected them and how they've gotten, how the
I did it. I'm doing it. I'm there. Yeah, all kinds of things like that. And you're going to reflect that stuff back. We're going to really, you know, acknowledge the effort, you know, that affirmation, not with great job, but just that observation, that reflection. You know, you accomplish what you set out to do, that impactful way. We're going to identify those strengths, reflect back that big picture of their success, you know, and explore with them, you know, ways to continue to maintain it, develops some contingency plans with them. And we're gonna just ask them and you know, in this stage, you know, what's helping you maintain success in this as we go forward. And we got one more stage. What's the last stage?
Relapse, recycle.
Yeah, that relapse, recycle. And you know, relapse, recycle, those kind of got some negative connotations with them. Maybe as coaches, it could be termination or adaptation. Maybe we got here, it's a habit, they're doing it, and maybe, you know, they don't need further coaching. Maybe they need coaching in another area or on another goal. So it could be termination or adaptation. And at this stage, you know, it's been maintained for more than 6 months, and the coach helps them determine whether it's time to end that coaching relationship or maybe continue with some further coaching around that maintenance or work on a new goal or what the client wants to do with us at that stage. And the reason I brought that up, you know, that this is a cyclic process and people can jump before, because with the relapse and recycle stage, maybe something did happen. Maybe this goal that they were working on is less important than something else, and we just jump back to another stage through the coaching process and help them work towards something different. But in this stage, the client's they're gonna be taking ownership. It's all about them. They're gonna be identifying their successes, you know, when they've done it, or they may be at the same time they may identify that they didn't hit this goal and they got more work to do. But regardless of whether, you know, that we have the adaptation or we got that relapse with them, we're still gonna look for those lessons learned with them, because maybe it could be as simple as they learned what didn't work. We're gonna explore successes that they did have with the journey with them and work with the client on applying those successes, those strengths to another area that they want. And, you know, we can ask them, you know, what strength did you use to overcome the obstacles? What supported you in this change? You know, and ask them where they want to go. You know, what are you going to do with this change that you've had? Let me stop sharing real quick. When we're talking about coaching, what stage do you feel that most clients are in?
When they're coming to you, I think they're in the first stage.
Think pre-contemplation?
I think they're all coming to us knowing that something needs to change in our life, but they just don't really know how to do it. So I think that would be most clients.
It's about 80% are in that ambivalent stage, you know. That can border between pre-contemplation, but also contemplation stage. And that's going to vary. That 80%, that's a generalized statistic. It's going to vary based on the demographic that you work for. I'm willing to bet that in private practice, most people if they're engaging a health coach and they choose to seek you out, they're in that contemplation stage. Sometime when you work with agencies or different things like that, where you're getting referrals from other sources, you may find more people that are in that contemplation stage. And 20% of health behavior change programs work from action stage. And you know what? They fail. Perfect example of this. How many have ever seen a weight loss program advertised on TV? And I don't want to call out names. Those all start with the action stage. They're going to jump right in. They're not going to explore why this person wants to lose weight. They're not going to explore with them how their life will be different. They're just going to write a very prescriptive, directive approach, do X, Y, and Z, and you're going to lose weight. And when we look at those from the stages of change perspective, they'll tell you 98% of their clients are successful. Yeah, they lose the weight they set out to lose in this 90-day program. Problem is, you go back 6 months from now, and they put that weight and more back on. Because they start with that goal stage. Their changes aren't linked to their values. They don't spend enough time building on their vision and the values. And we call it mapping back to the map, mission, aspiration, and purpose if you want to, but just linking the change back to the values, to what's important to them. And 80% of people who set out to make changes are going to have some sort of relapse through the stages, probably at least twice before it becomes a permanent change or a behavior change. And that's just, knowledge is power. And being able to maybe normalize this with our clients can be helpful for our clients. Is, like that word failure. I always like to say you learn what didn't work. Normalizing this with our clients can be powerful as we move them forward with change. And that's just a real quick overview of the change. What's the biggest, somebody give me their biggest takeaway about coaching around the stages of change.
I would say when you're doing this, when you're coaching around the trans theoretical model, so that's the name I know for, you're meeting them where they're at. So you're not trying to just push them into some other areas. You're meeting them there, and you're trying to focus on that spot to then progress them when they're ready, and not force something around upon them.
Yeah. And even when someone's in that pre-contemplation stage, it says they're not thinking about change, but we have those tools in our toolbox, that deeper inquiry, reflection, helping those identify the values, helping them identify those reasons for changes. It says from the definition, they're not likely to make a change in the next 6 months, but through coaching, we can move them from pre-contemplation to contemplation. Another thing, it's just neuroscience of change, change is values driven, change is emotion driven, helping people identify those reasons, and I think I've shared in here before, in a previous life, I was a drill sergeant, and this pains me to say this. People do not do what they do because they're told to do it.
Mm-hmm.
They do things because they want to do them. And that's what coaching really does. It helps people find their want to. And understanding the stages of change can help us help our clients find their want to. I oversimplify things, but that's what it boils down to. We help them find their want to. Do we have any questions around the stages of change?
Probably when we do some more coaching, we will have more, like when we actually do it.
I know I went through it quickly, but it's just something to keep in your head as you're going through there. Allow it to inform you to meet the client where they're at. Turn it over to Charlie.
And then that's really all we have for tonight. So we have about 9 minutes left. For those wanting CEs, Haley will send out a survey to you all for the CEs for you to fill that out. If you want multiple CEs, remember we provide mental health CEs, we provide National Board for Health and Wellness Coaching CEs, nursing CEs, and Yoga Alliance continuing education as well. So if you want one of those or any of those, let us know. It's no additional cost for the extra continuing ed. So just let us know. All right. Thanks,
I
everybody.
just gotta make everybody jealous real quick. I shut my camera off because my wife brought me warm chocolate chip cookies down. They just came out of the oven.
Oh,
That's so nice for you.
yeah.
I would like a wife. Like the wives are the best. Nobody else is talking about their husbands or anything, so you
Well,
do
my
good.
wife does. I'm awesome.
Good.
He thinks. He thinks.
Mhm.
All right, everybody. We'll see
Uh,
you next week. And if y'all
next
have
week.
questions, reach out to us. All right.
All right, thank you.
Charlie,
Yeah.
I'll have a question one.
Yeah.
And actually Todd as well, maybe.
Yeah.
I did some of the. I know that we're supposed to be doing the stuff with like the other person that we're going to be coaching. I haven't. I know we got it today, so I'm going to contact her probably tomorrow. But I did do one already with my cousin.
Yeah, you
And I
can
just had, huh?
you can record that for sure.
No,
If you
I did. I'm waiting for him to send me the video because he had to do it on his end, because of his scheduling, so he had to do it on his computer to block off that time. But I did have a question. I mean, I know you guys will probably be reviewing the video, but it was something he brought up after, just because we talked a little bit after, and I wanted to have some constructive feedback and things that I can work on. Two things that I remember him telling me is a lot of the reflection. He was like, "Oh, I get the reflection," and he's like, "I do it, and that's something that I do a lot myself." He's like, and this is just something I thought about as well. He's like, is it well, my question is it appropriate to ask or tell them like, hey, I might be saying some of the stuff back to you, and it's not to be like repetitive, but it's more of a way of like letting you know that I'm understanding what you're telling me. And that's something he brought up to me, so I was just kind of curious about that. Or maybe I just need to make it smoother.
I mean, when you're
Oh, yeah.
starting out coaching, and we'll get into this